Today is Friday, February 27th, 2026, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. Finally back in the saddle with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. We've had a busy couple of weeks, haven't we?
We have. It's been wonderful to be back at the NRB and wonderful sitting across the table from you again, Mr. Robinson. It was nice being in the car with the other guys, but it's not good time for some good old regular podcasting stuff.
I'll just, before we get into what the podcast is, I do want to say hello to all of my friends in Wisconsin, where we went for the Merrill weekend.
Yeah.
And not just Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. But
Yeah.
really had a nice time out there. The Sandors rolled out the red carpet, and we always love seeing them and talking to them. And believe it or not, Mr. Sandor and I did talk about history quite a bit. Like he is a true historian. He's halfway through his book on Napoleon, and I just listened to a podcast.
He does love this stuff.
Okay, Mr. Smith, you woke up with a righteous zeal. What are we talking about
Boy,
today?
I don't know about that, but it's a topic that we've talked about talking about before, and we've actually talked about part of this before, but we want to dive in a little more deeply today. And so today we're going to talk about tattoos and piercings and how to think about them biblically. Thanks for staying with us through the music, and welcome again to the Living Youth Podcast. And we are at risk of going long on this, though Mr. Robinson thinks we could do a really short one, and I get his reasoning. We can talk about that. But before we jump into the topic of tattoos and piercings and such, let us allow Disclaimer Guy to orient us just a bit on this topic and what should be your perspective as you listen to the podcast. Hit it, Disclaimer Guy.
When facing large decisions, be sure to seek your parents' help, guidance, and advice, not just the advice of faceless voices on a podcast.
Thank you, Disclaimer Guy. And also, I highlighted, boy, Ms. Robinson seeing this, it was surprising to me. It shouldn't be, but it was how long we've done this. We addressed tattoos before, way back. This is episode 186, I think, and we did it in episode 8. Like single digit, baby, back in episode 8. The title of that one was, If Christ Has a Tattoo, Can I Get One? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I do. I had forgotten that's what triggered it, because I think the reasoning was he has his name written on his thigh.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a fun one. So hey, go back. You can go listen to. I think our mics sounded a little funnier and stuff. So go back and we'll try to link to it if I remember to do that on livingyouth.org. But go back and listen to episode 8. It's right there on the list at the bottom. However, let's jump right in. We're going to do this in an orderly way so that we actually progress in a clean way, because I feel like it's one that I could begin rambling at any minute on. And so first, let's hit tattoos. We'll talk about tattoos first because the lines there are super clear. At the same time, there's a lot you can learn from doing more than just thinking, well, is it okay to get one or not? In fact, Mr. Robinson has a real short take on tattoos. I don't mean to throw into the... What's your short take, Mr. Robinson?
Okay. So we both know that there are people out there with tattoos.
Yes.
And so if I just say my true off the cuff thought about them, it'll be a little bit offensive to people that have tattoos. But
you're very kind, Mr. Robinson.
Why would you ever get a tattoo?
Yeah.
I just don't get it.
He doesn't understand. But let's hey, we know a lot of adults with tattoos. I know I've got relatives, actually not in the church, but relatives. There are ministers in the church, that either they got tattoos at some point in their life when they were kind of away from the faith or hadn't even come to it yet. And we all make foolish decisions and decisions that we shouldn't.
Well, and some people, well, a lot of times it was, before you came in the church even. Like I think my great uncle, he died a few years ago. He had one from World War II. So I can kind of understand a little bit if you and your buddies fought all the way to Iwo Jima and you were just whatever, like that you would have.
We're going to commemorate it or something.
Or unit's badge or something and tattooed on. I can kind of understand that, but
otherwise it's kind of foreign to you.
Yeah, well, it especially bothers me on the women, which now I'm sexist as well. Women are beautiful. God designed women to be beautiful, and then you kind of see a tattoo on them, and it's just a distraction from their natural beauty.
You know, that's actually a really good way to think about that. I hadn't thought about that specifically. And we're kind of getting into more than just the do you do it or not versus what does God think? But, you know, if you go back way back, the sermon that I talked about woman by design, I think was it,
Yeah.
talking about how God designed women and how both men and women reflect God's image in different ways. And when it comes to women, part of that design is beauty. You know, there's more naturally there than there is for us ugly old dudes. But that said, the nice thing about this topic, this side of today's topic, is that there is just straightforward guidance in the Bible in terms of a do or don't, if you will, because we're trying to move you past just asking, is it okay, as we've talked about many times, even a podcast with that title. But it's right there in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 28. Leviticus 19, verse 28 says plainly, you shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the eternal. God says, don't do it.
Yep.
Don't put tattoos on you.
End of podcast.
Yeah, that's what Mr. said. Boom. And it is interesting that he says, you know, it's now some would say, you know, let me go ahead and say, well, hey, let's see if I push back. What about verse 27? Verse 27, right before that, says that you shall not shave around the sides of your head, nor shall you disfigure the edges of your beard. So are you saying that we got to look like Duck Dynasty guys all the time and the rest? Well, first, let me say, absolutely not. This is not speaking, even in verse 27, against being well-groomed. There's other places, even like the prophesied temple that Ezekiel talks about in the millennium, where God does want men to be well-groomed. It is speaking of particular sorts of cuts and trimmings that are done as part of a certain cultic worship. Notice it says there about disfiguring, you know, the edges of your beard. There are certain things that were done. However, verse 28 actually says any. Don't do any. This is much more plain. Don't look for excuses.
Yeah.
Just read God's word and decide I'm going to do that.
Mr. O'Gwen would often point out, like, there's more than one style, but a very common one is the tonsure. And I think
right.
it's almost looks like you put a bowl over the top of the head and then cut the sides and the back.
Yeah, you see that with monks,
Yep.
kind of the kind of classic cartoony sort of monk, and they even say like there used to be the kind of cartoony devilish look, you know, where you kind of made your beard like a pointed dagger, you know, or something. But no, this is actually really different. However, we don't want to just, and we're going to use tattoos to do a lot of this talk before we get to piercings. But let's use that because here we do have a very plain statement. Is it okay? No, it's not okay. You know, kind of end of story. But still, let's just not stop there. It's kind of like when you clearly know what your mom and dad are trying to teach you or trying to tell you to do. Still, it's worth thinking about why is this important to them? And let's do that here because that is such a key that Mr. Gerald Weston tries to hammer home with us over and over and over is that asking, is this okay, is not really enough of the question. That's not really the question we need to be focusing on as much as more broadly, what is God's mind on such things? How can I be well within his will in such things? What is God actually thinking?
Well, you know, because you very easily start reasoning around this if you want. I have personally, everything I've learned is personally, I suppose.
That's very profound, Mr. Robinson. Thank you.
Really learned how important it is to get your reasoning turned around, like what you're talking about. You know, Mr. O'Gwen would also say, the question you should ask is, what would be the most pleasing to God? So you use it with the tattoo, for example. You go, well, what if I got a really small one and I had it somewhere on my body where nobody would hardly ever see it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, it's not. What's a way we can reason around it? It's, oh, if God doesn't, you know, I'll credit Mr. DeSimone for having this attitude all the time. If he thinks that they try to have this as their kind of family guidance, if they think that God doesn't want something done, then, you know, how much more as a family are we going to stay away from that? You know, if God doesn't like tattooing, for example, and clearly he does not, our mindset should be one of not trying to figure out how we could maybe kind of get around it or do something tasteful or whatever. It should just be, let's avoid that in the fullest way possible.
Oh, I love that. So that is this idea of, yeah, if we can see he doesn't like it, then let's not try to negotiate how closely we can get to it, right? Let's just say, hey, God doesn't like that. I don't have anything to do with that. That is right in the spirit of what we're kind of talking about. I won't go to the verses in particular, but I'll tell you where they are. 1 Corinthians 6, as well as 1 Corinthians 10. Paul's trying to make this point to the Corinthians that, oh, you guys are so focused. Oh, what we want to do here, it's lawful. It's lawful. He says, okay, fine. But is it actually helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Does it edify? Is it something that's at risk of bringing you into something and under something that you shouldn't be? And he's really, honestly, that was the Apostle Paul trying to do what Mr. Weston's often trying to do with this. Stop asking just yourself, oh, it's lawful, I can check off the box. Now, in this case, again, with tattooing, we know it's not lawful. So we have that. But let's use that as a ground to explore some of this thinking before we move to the other topic.
I think about that with food, actually. Now, this might be going too far. This is a thought I had 20 years ago, probably, when trying to evaluate it. For example, we have the laws of clean and unclean food. But have you ever thought about how that could maybe even be applied, just the principle of it, to like what food you're eating? For example, is it lawful for me to eat a box of Ho-Hos and wash it down with a Mountain Dew? Sure. Is that the best? Is that the best thing that we're doing for our body? And if you eat like that all the time, you're going to start suffering some health problems.
Now someone's going to go look at a box of Ho-Hos and see one of the ingredients is ground up iguana and say, oh, Mr. Robinson said ground up iguana.
When I ate Ho-Hos, it wasn't like that.
Boy, those ingredients do change, but that's a great way to think about it. That's a great example, Mr. Robinson. All right. So I thought of at least a few different things. I think I wrote the number 5, but I only thought of 4. Here's some example areas to kind of just think about more broadly when it comes to things. Again, we already know tattoos, God says no. But again, trying to think of what he's thinking about. Let's explore God's thinking. This is about biblical thinking on the podcast. So just one area, health. The health. You when it comes to tattoos, you literally have this machine that is injecting ink into your body. Ink, your body, just so you know, God didn't design it to soak up ink. And I would point to some of our News and Prophecy posts that Dr. Scott Winnail works so hard on there, working with his dad, Dr. Douglas Winnail, as well as the others that support that work. They've had multiple posts in the News and Prophecy items about studies that clearly say, let's just say this, there's not a lot of studies saying tattoos are great for you, but there's a growing body of them saying they do cause problems. The body does not like having that ink in there, and they're increasingly discovering it's causing health problems. I think I should have gone back to look. I think even some cancers and some things, because the body just doesn't want that stuff.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that other than I also have observed anecdotally that there's a new study, whatever, finds that tattoos cause problems.
Ho-Hos, shove it down with Mountain Dew and tattoos.
And also back then.
Back then.
There's also the Fritos chili cheese flavored.
Oh, man. Those are good. Moderation. I got to remember moderation. All right. That said, so that's one thing. Maybe, God, I'm not saying in this case that's all God is doing, but God does care about our health, and he is often giving us laws to help protect our health. That's one way to think about his mind. Now, here's one that can be subtle, but I think this is really important, and that is our tribe. Now, by tribe, I mean the part of our culture, like the subculture in our culture, that we're choosing to associate ourselves with. And I don't just mean physically hang out with, but to be like, if I decide to go to services this weekend, and instead of wearing a suit and tie and fitting in like all the other men that are there here in Charlotte, I decide to wear a Star Wars t-shirt. Well, one, I hope they're not going to let me in. That's what I would count on them.
Deacons are going to politely escort you out.
That's right. I hope they do. I mean, it's one thing if I'm a brand new person, doesn't know any better, but it's like, okay, I think we're having a medical emergency with Mr. Smith. And I would be trying to identify with a different culture, not the culture of the church. I'd be coming and trying to identify with something else.
I think that's actually a really good point, and I'll even maybe add a little to it, and I'm going to lose half the audience. When we were growing up, tattoos still were not really very popular, and in fact, you'd say something like, if you see somebody with a tattoo, like, "What are you, a trucker?" And I do think it was kind of a tribal thing, like motorcycle gangs, truckers, military, the ones. But now it feels like the tribe has grown, and this isn't a good thing. It's like more and more Americans are getting tattoos. So I can't tell you how many YouTube channels where they travel that I don't watch anymore because they try out a new one and they got tattoos like right away. I actually, it's just one man's opinion, I will not watch a YouTube channel where they have visible piercings.
Really?
No, I mean, sorry,
Tattoos. Oh, wow.
But
Interesting.
whether even if we don't consciously understand what it is, I think that Americans going more and more for tattoos is actually a subtle sign of something going on. And
Well, I do think it is. It's easy to say, these people are doing that and they seem like fine people. We're not even saying they're necessarily bad people, but it is still an indication of a certain subculture. And do I want to associate, even if it's just the subculture that thinks it's okay to just dress yourself up in tattoos? When I look at most of the movers and shakers in society, I don't actually see them with a whole lot of tattoos. At least it's, kind of covered up. But this broader thing I'd like to highlight is that, what subculture we should be trying to identify with is God's church. There is a body of Christ. There is a people that God has set apart for himself. And you know what? This isn't the first generation in that church. I'm not the first generation to be in this church. There are many others. By adding marks to my body, am I identifying with that tribe and that subculture or something else?
And you definitely are signaling something, because, so here's an example. Do you remember probably 15 years ago, maybe, there was a very controversial shooting and the person was wearing a hoodie and there's a big debate.
Oh, I do remember that. Yes.
What you're wearing shouldn't mean anything, and that's not a good take just on its face. The way we present ourselves really does say a lot, but the where it really drove home for me was, this was I think a couple years ago. I was out very early in the morning walking before the sun rose, and it was cold, and I actually have a zip up hoodie, and I put the hoodie up over my head because it was cold, and ran across my neighbor and her dog, who just started barking at me and didn't bark until I took the hoodie off and he could recognize who it was. So I kind of projected something that even a dog picked up on and viewed me as a potential danger. So, but the point being that how we present ourselves does matter.
It truly does. In fact, studies have shown, whether it's true or not, that men who see women with tattoos assume they are more promiscuous, for instance. Doesn't mean they are. But then you have to think, well, why is that? Part of it's cultural associations. Also, there's the fact that things like that still tend to be associated with a certain kind of willingness to transgress, a willingness to push boundaries. And again, then what subculture, what tribe are we trying to identify with? If we're trying to identify with the tribe that is God's church, that is the body of Christ, here's how far that goes. Like of those in the ministry that I know that happen to have tattoos because they, misspent youth, whatever the case is, they certainly don't go around parading them. They try to cover them up, if anything. They wear long sleeves. They try not to show them. Why? Because they know what tribe they want to be a part of, and they want to be a part of this one. They know what example they want to send. You know what I don't see a lot of tattoos on? Ministers' wives. I just don't see them with, something along their neck, or again, if there is anything, it's because it's probably covered up because what tribe do I want to associate with? Too often we look to other people groups outside of God's church for the example of behaviors that influence us. And that can be subconscious too. We can be feeling a draw, not even realizing what we're doing is allowing society to point us to other people versus the actual examples that God gives us in the body of Christ and surrounds us with. It reminds me of Philippians 4:9. There's a lot of verses where Paul says, hey, don't do like the Gentiles. And he's even talking to the Gentiles, saying, don't do like the other Gentiles. But specifically in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9, he's actually telling those he's speaking to, he points them to, reminds them of the things that they, quote, learned and received and saw in me. He says, these things do. That is, he was trying to model for them a way of life. That's what the older members in God's church seek to do for the youngers, is to model a way of life. And is that what they're doing to themselves?
Well, it's funny. I can't promise this, actually. Let me backtrack already. I will try not to bring in that I have my first grandbaby, which is pretty exciting. Too often.
I would say Mr. Robinson is finding great ways to bring that in here and there.
Right. Oh, man, it was okay. I can't. Okay. And I was in the kitchen, and lightly affectionate to my wife, and the baby's over there with mom, and they're watching me, and I was like, oh, that's right, we need to be modeling happy marriages for Clark so that he knows.
But it's true. That's right.
People can laugh about that, but man, you know what? It was Mr. Carl Beiersdorfer that once said that King Solomon wrote a book of wisdom to his son. And he said that didn't matter as much as the example that he set.
Yeah, I made that comment to someone else. I used the word noise. I think that, you can say all the things you want to say, but your example has the potential to generate so much more noise they'll never be able to hear what you say. Just kind of move through this real quickly. Let's go to the other couple things. The next thing to consider in terms of God's mind, in this case concerning tattoos, is ownership. Your body is owned by someone, and this society tells you to think it's just you, right? Really, it's you. You do the things you want to do. Your body is your canvas to express your ideas. Well, the Bible says the opposite of that. In 1 Corinthians 6:19, verse 20, we read there in 1 Corinthians 6:19, starting there, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which is in you, which you have from God, and you are not your own? Verse 20 to me is the kicker. For you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. They belong to Him. Our body belongs to Him. And we don't just glorify Him with our spirit, we also glorify Him with our body. And so it is not a blank canvas meant for you to write on. It is God's canvas to show His way of life to other people.
So I don't know. This is not science, but I did ask ChatGPT for 5 reasons that women commonly get tattoos.
Oh, really? We'll see what the LLM says.
Well, I did this before you said what you just said, but number 4 is empowerment and control over the body. The first one is self-expression and identity. Then the second one is marking meaningful life events or memories. 3, aesthetic or beauty and body decoration.
I don't know if we read it. I think we did, but way back in episode 8, our 8th podcast, I think it was 8. I told you the number earlier. I think we might have read it from that time, a quote from a woman who was going through the painful process of having all of her tattoos removed. And I hope we said it in that one. It's worth listening to, but if not, I've read her comment, I think on telecast even, where she highlights that tattoos, something to the effect of tattoos are almost always an example of a broken person.
Yeah.
That they're doing it in, especially when it's like her, that it's in response to something and that express a brokenness.
I have also anecdotally heard that it's often linked with body dissatisfaction. That the female tattooer, the person is anyway. There's something about their body they're not happy with, and so sometimes a tattoo can indicate that.
And we should add, we're not trying to just pick on the ladies at all. It's just those are the examples.
They're the ones that bother me the most.
But actually, most of the examples I know where someone has one those happen to be guys, and so this definitely applies to both of us.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the last one I'll mention is, and I have to say, Mr. Robinson has daughters and I have sons, so maybe that's also.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But the final thing to mention in terms of trying to think how God, I'm not saying these are the only ways to think about how God thinks. These were categories that came to us for this topic. And that is also the fact that we are made in God's image. This world is very image focused. Influencers, very image focused. Often people have tattoos because there's an image they're trying to communicate about themselves, what they think. Well, we are made in the image of the divine creator. Genesis 1 verses 26, 27 makes that plain. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And it says in verse 27, he created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. We belong to God, and more than that, we reflect his actual image. What an astonishing blessing that is. And so to think that we're going to take God's image, but use it as our personal canvas,
right?
Personally, this is just me, but I think that beyond even tattoos, getting into some of the other things we'll talk about in a moment, into the whole body modification culture, if you will. At the core of that is a willful disregard of the fact that this is the image of God himself. And it's like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want with it.
Made in God's image is a pretty powerful one, in my opinion. My daughter Maddie told me anecdotally some years ago that this influencer woman was asked if she ever thought about getting a tattoo, and she was like, "No, that would be like putting a bumper sticker on a Bentley, on a bumper sticker on a Porsche or something like that."
Right,
I thought
right.
that was funny.
Oh, that is nice. So, okay, again, tattoos were kind of an easy topic because God says very plainly there, don't do it. And so, of course, we don't do it. But in that case, if the question is, well, is it okay? Well, then there's a clear no, it's not okay. But that's why I thought it'd be great to kind of explore God's mind. What are his thoughts? What is his mind? What is his thinking? As we get into the other things, the topic today is not just tattoos, but also piercings. So as we get into piercings, which are also common today, I used to joke that, it seems like sometimes these days you can't work in a Chipotle unless you've got at least 7 piercings.
Right.
But I know that's not true. Many of you work in Chipotle, and I appreciate you. I love a good burrito bowl. I really like the chicken al pastor. That's what I've been getting these days.
Interesting. I always go for the barbacoa.
I almost always do, but it's kind of a seasonal thing I think they're doing. This is not supposed to be a commercial for Chipotle. Okay, that said, let's kind of group them just a little bit because there's kind of a degree here. Let's just focus first on earrings. The piercing of, say, the earlobe, where you kind of keep things simple. You know what is interesting? I tried to find the earliest comment about earrings that I could find, and interestingly, it was in Genesis 35. And in Genesis 35, it's kind of an interesting comment because it's that time when Jacob is telling his family, give me all your idols, I'm going to bury them.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, give me your earrings too, and he's going to bury them. Now, does that mean he's completely anti-earrings? No, the implication is that the easiest implication, I will say, this is not stated directly, is that the earrings probably had, heathen markings on them, things
They're
like that.
They're tied to some kind of worship that was not God.
Which jewelry often is, not all the time, certainly not all the time is, but it can be. And you think today, especially in what is called Christian culture out there, those we even had, by the way, if you're a young person who wrote us about crosses and things like that, we did get your email. I haven't responded yet, haven't had time, but we did get it. But yeah, we actually don't use crosses in our worship in the Church of God because it's essentially a heathen symbol. Yes, Jesus was crucified on a stake, a cross. We don't know the exact shape of what he did, but it is very plain it's a heathen symbol, and we're not an iconographic worship, not an iconographic faith in that way, looking at the commandments. But yet, very popular item out there in worldly Christianity, on necklaces, on shirts, on earrings.
Yeah. It reminds me of, because it is extremely rare, you're right, to have some kind of image. There are some things that were on the temple that were decorative, like the pomegranate trees and palm trees. But one of the best examples of this, in my opinion, was when the children of Israel once again were in trouble and a plague was going through, and they had to make the bronze serpent and put it on. Well, they kept that around for a while. And eventually, they had to get rid of it because it had been turned into an idol.
That's right. Even when there's some like God sanctioned use, like say the Ark of the Covenant or some of the walls, it's like even in just that little bit. Let alone if God didn't have any restrictions at all, it's like it would just be going crazy. All right. So that said, there are some also non-Israelite cultures. There is a culture thing to this in which even men wore earrings, apparently in a decorative way. In Judges 8, there's the implication that the Ishmaelites, in fact, it even says they'd taken some loot, if you will, and he says, well, give me, Gideon says, what you gained, including the earrings. But then it highlights that there were earrings because they had been Ishmaelites. What's the implication? That was a culture. It was something that the Israelites were not known for, but the Ishmaelites were known for, and so they had earrings from them. That is, at least the men in that case. And also Egyptians. Now, how would you get Egyptians? Well, because knowing it wasn't a part of Israelite culture, after they, in Exodus 32 in particular, when they're talking about donating things for gold for the temple, he talks about breaking off the earrings in your ears. They were a slave people, a servant people, and they did. They had earrings and all sorts of things. And so there were cultures there in which even men had earrings, but we'll kind of get to that. Is that our culture? And the purpose of it is to beautify in general. Well, there's other purposes we'll get to. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Proverbs 25 uses earrings as a image of something beautifying the ear, which is essentially feminine in that regard, beautifying the ear. Ezekiel 16 God talks about decorating his bride, Israel. And so you're talking about beautifying. But it's also, if you look at the Old Testament law and the Old Covenant, there is tied to ownership and covenantal bonding. Without turning there, we'll just give you as an example Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15, which says if you have a servant that wants to permanently tie himself to his master, then he could have his master pierce his ear with an awl, into the door, actually, of the home, is kind of symbolic. And so when you really think about it, there's a real symbol of commitment there, because you're literally making a permanent hole in your body. And so that's some of the biblical sense of some of the things attached to earrings. The Bible talks about them as being, ornaments, right, and beautifying. But does that mean the sky's the limit? And here's where we get to. It's like, well, look, there's earrings in the Bible, so we can have some. Well, okay, yeah, there are earrings in the Bible. But does that mean the sky's the limit? Like, for instance, man, woman, doesn't make a difference. A child gets born, let's just stick an earring in there immediately. I don't recommend that. Hey, that's one in each earlobe, but how about 2? Or how about 4? Or how about 8? How about that thing where you just kind of go all the way up your ear with all those studs? Is the mere fact that something's mentioned in the Bible, then I guess really the sky is the limit. Well, no, that's where we get into this thinking we're talking about
Can
today.
I have 20 Mountain Dews a day?
That's right. Well, and I'm not, let me testify. I do not know Mr. Robinson to be a fan of Mountain Dew.
No.
I've never seen him actually drink
Okay,
one.
this is probably so not fair. And somebody out there this probably loves Mountain Dew. To me, in my mind, when I want to pick out what I perceive as the most unhealthy soft drink you could possibly have for some reason,
You're very anti-Mountain Dew. I think I've heard that they are really high in caffeine and really high, I think, in sugar.
Yeah.
I went through a Mountain Dew phase when I was younger, but that was probably not, probably Big Red was the one I wondered about the most.
Well, when we grew up, we did not have access to
Sodas?
soft drinks at all. And when I got older, and then you could start making some of your own decisions, I didn't get Coke. I don't know why, but Dr. Pepper. You and I are Texas
I've got some
Dr.
history with
Pepper
that.
fans. Yeah.
Well, I will say that I used to imbibe sodas a whole lot more than I did, and that's kind of how I became the man I came to be that I had to get rid of. So I had to, let's just say, I'm 50 pounds away from that man, and that man, part of what built that old man was a whole lot of Dr. Pepper. Yeah. But that's still a really good point. So you can have a sip of something. Oh, does that mean you can have 8 sips? It's like, I'm here with other adult men, and we're going to share a beer. Well, I'll just go ahead and have 15 of those. No, actually, don't do that. But that's where we get into this. It's not just a matter of, well, it's okay or is it not okay? What does God think about that? What would his mind be on the matter? Yes, okay. You see earrings in the Bible. But does that cause you to stop asking questions like this? And it shouldn't. If anything, now you're getting to the territory Paul says, okay, you see something's lawful, but what's the helpful thing to do? What is the thing that actually edifies?
Well, and it does, from what I understand, once you start moving off the lobe in other parts of the ear, the risk level goes up a little bit.
I think health-wise, I suspect it does. You're talking about getting into cartilage, things like that. You just mentioned health. That was one of the things we talked about considering. Let's look at tribe and subculture. If you're going to just put a bunch of piercings in your ear, or let's just say different things, they got things like rods, that go through the ear and things like that. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do that, what tribe or subculture are you seeking to identify with? And you might say, well, I'm not really seeking to identify with them. Well, then I would ask you to say, okay, maybe you're not seeking actively, consciously to identify with these other tribes and subcultures, but where did you first get the idea? Did you get it from the lady you saw in church, or did you get it from someone who was a member of that subculture? When people look at that, what tribe or subculture, if you will, are they going to identify you with?
Well, we learned that lesson the hard way. I would say it was, I don't know if I want to call it a parenting mistake, but at the very least, it was a parenting
temporary misfire.
Well, it just like we were naive. We underestimated,
okay.
And that was, my wife dressing modestly and us kind of emphasizing that was nothing compared to what our girls saw on Instagram or whatever, just out in the world. You didn't even have to be Instagram, but what are young women wearing and doing and on billboards and everything, and that was more powerful than the messaging at home.
Right. Oh, you have talked about that before. And yeah, exactly. I wouldn't call that as a mistake. It really is more an underestimation of the other influence, because while y'all were working hard to exemplify the tribe of humanity or subculture that they should identify with, which is the church, we have to keep in mind we are constantly broadcast by another tribe, if you will, by the rest of it. And it does have its influence on us. And Mr. Phil Senna likes to ask about these very topics. He likes to say, okay, that's what you want. Have you bothered to ask why you want that, and to do a deep dive into why you find that appealing?
I mean, because you could ask the question, I don't know how you would make this a plausible test, but if we didn't have TV and other things like that, and you like, so let's say we're Little House on the Prairie and conservative families, and would you ever, like, would it occur to you to put 27 earrings in your ear? I know I'm going to lose some of the younger people with some of this reasoning, but like, you are influenced by what you see, and what you see is people with a lot of piercings, some, and that's, you're just kind of, there is a, I don't want to call it a gray line, but like a gradient where we go from this is okay into we've kind of gone too far, and that's, we're mimicking what's going on in the world.
We are, and they don't have to tell us to do it. It's interesting. If I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Robinson, but when the devil tempts Eve, he never straight up says, "Hey, go eat that fruit.
Right.
Go do it." He just brings it to mind, and he lets her mind do the rest. That's what God wants to do. He doesn't have people saying, "Hey, go shove a broomstick through the top of your ear." Yep. He's not doing that. I mean, the devil isn't doing that. But he is making sure you see a lot of examples, and those examples do make a difference for us. But here's the thing. Where does God want us looking? Does he want us looking at the people in the ads? Does he want us looking at the people that are singing to us on Spotify? Or does he want us looking to the examples in the church? And the generations that have gone before us, like, I try to look to the men who are older than me and more experienced than me, and who are occupying a spiritual place in which I long to be, and let them let me take my example from them. And that's what our young guys and young ladies need to do. You who are listening, look to those who are occupying spiritual places that you want to occupy, and take their manner of life, and then ask yourself, well, what do they indicate? That's the tribe I want to be a part of. How many piercings does the regional pastor's wife have in her ear? How much? What has she done with that? And then seek to be a part of that tribe. And it's time to kind of pivot to the guys, because admittedly, earrings in guys is more and more acceptable in our culture. But still pay attention to who. I remember the first time I saw Harrison Ford, the guy that plays Indiana Jones, get an earring, because I love the old character Indiana Jones. Not the old version of him. I haven't even seen the last movie, but boy, when I was a kid, that first movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I loved it.
Yeah.
But that said, not a recommendation. I'm not going to get disclaimer guy out again, but I have seen it. However, he's got like an earring. He's had one for a long time. And when I saw that, I instantly just thought, well, Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's what you tend to see with guys is sports stars that want to show off some wealth, show off a certain tribal identification. You see Hollywood guys, again, Hollywood, another kind of tribe to identify with, not the sports guys, but that. What you don't tend to see are heads of state, serious men that have to communicate a certain seriousness outside of these other kinds of environments. It's generally those that are image conscious and want to look, I'd say, cool. I just kind of put it kind of plainly. At least that's my take on them. You don't see it about men that are known for being incredibly serious with their responsibilities. You see it with the image conscious sort. And you know where you don't see it? You don't see it in the leadership in God's church. And again, I know some men in the ministry that had their ears pierced when they were in their time away, or before they came into the church. They're kind of hoping you don't notice the holes, right? Because that was the time in their life they're not happy with. So then finally, I guess your body is God's image. Again, think about that. And he owns it. At what point do you so pierce your ear that really you're kind of discounting the fact that God made that ear as a part of actually crafting His own image, where it's more a hunk of piercing metal and stuff than it is an ear, or Obi-Wan Kenobi said of Darth Vader, he's more machine than man now, saying that ear is more stud and stone than ear now. So anyway, that's enough about ear piercing. It's kind of fairly non-controversial in terms of that it's okay to get your ears pierced, for ladies in particular. But there should be, just because something is okay doesn't mean we just dive in and everything. It's just willy-nilly and there ain't no rules. There does need to be some actual meditating on how God thinks, and we'll see that increasingly as we get into the next things. The next item that we have coming up is nose rings. Let's move from the ears to the nose. And before we do that, I want to highlight that I have once again, let me hit the button. Once again, noticed that I left my laptop not muted, and because of our weird setup here and such, the sound actually comes through the computer, and that potentially you can hear it on the speakers. So hopefully for the first half hour plus of our podcast, you have not had audio problems. But if so, feel free and contact us for a full refund on your podcast. And
our policy is very clear.
And the background being that we still are amateurs when it comes to sound things, for sure. Okay, that said, we're talking about nose rings. Now, we know, kind of like what you mentioned with tattoos, but here it's a little bit different, but same situation. We know that some of you listening already have these, and just like some already have tattoos, or there are men out there with pierced ears, we can't undo some things in our life, but we can move forward in truth and wisdom, and we just want to give you principles to consider. First, we need to highlight, yes, nose rings or jewels in the nose or something, depending on the translation, and some will debate some of these, but for the sake of discussion, it's okay to just consider these to be the way they're normally translated. You do see some examples in the Bible, in the cultures of the Bible. Context is important. Genesis chapter 24, for instance, talks about Abraham's servant. He's been sent to find a wife for Isaac, comes across Rebekah, who ends up being of the very household that he was sent, of all these people, he had no idea, and this wonderful young woman comes and helps him. And when he starts to realize that God has really blessed this is potentially the wife for my master's son, he brings out gold bracelets and a nose ring, it says, of some sort, and kind of places these things on her. And then she goes home, and dad and brother say, like, what in the world? Where did that nose ring and bracelets come from? And she's, this guy. And he explains, yes, I was sent to find a wife for my master's son. But then I think it's a little more intriguing. I don't even mind reading this for context. Is that kind of weird, Ms. Robinson? I don't mind reading from the Bible. Does that sound a little weird?
Are there times that you think that...
That's what I was about to say. I just don't want to sometimes. No, in this case, I think it'd be good to read. See, Ezekiel 16, starting in verse 10. Now, this is a great passage in which God is speaking of himself in very symbolic language, because he pictures Israel as an actual potential bride, and he's talking about being a bride and groom. And this actually is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, of course, who is the God of the Old Testament. But he's using this language describing how a husband shows love to his wife or his betrothed, and he gives examples of how he behaved towards Israel and uses that symbolically here. So in Exodus 16, we'll start in verse 10. He says to Israel, I clothed you in embroidered cloth and gave you sandals of badger skin. I clothed you with fine linen and covered you with silk. I adorned you with ornaments, put bracelets on your wrists and a chain on your neck. And I put a jewel in your nose, earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your clothing was of fine linen, silk, and embroidered cloth. You ate pastry of fine flour, honey, and oil. You were exceedingly beautiful and succeeded to royalty. Your fame went out among the nations because of your beauty, for it was perfect through my splendor which I had bestowed on you, says the Lord Eternal. Now, I read that far because I wanted you to get some context. Also to see in verse 14, which will be important, he says, I bestowed this on you, because that's an important point we'll bring up that relates to Genesis 24 as well. And I'll say, Mr. Robinson, this passage comes up often when people want to justify themselves getting a nose ring, say a young lady. It's usually a young lady, but I did see an ad with some sports guy, I think, showing some kind of, I think it was a sports guy showing a nose ring in him. But it's usually more common with young ladies these days. And they don't come to say, hey, look at verse 10. Is it okay if I get some badger skin sandals, right? You know,
Right,
or hey, look at can I get a crown? Is it okay if I wear a crown, on my head? It seems to be just this used for this one particular thing.
Yes, no, that's a great point. I actually hadn't thought of it like that because, like most of the time, the way I handle it, if this subject comes up in any way or somebody asks me, I always reply, "Have you talked to your minister?"
That's right. There's a reason we had disclaimer guys start off with this is we're going to highlight again here. If you're young and you have parents, then you have parents and you need to listen to them. And even if something is technically okay, to act in rebellion is not okay. And rebellion shows up in a lot of ways. One is the blatant, I don't care what you say, I'm going to go do it. And the other is the constant pushing and nagging,
Yes.
which is often still motivated by that spirit.
When you look up the scriptures that might be in some way related to piercing or the idea of an earring or something like that, this is, to me, a good example where I would take this back around to the idea of ownership. The piercing of the ear with the owl. That's not an
Awl.
owl.
Awl,
Yeah,
I
I'm not talking about a big-horned owl.
A bird.
Yeah, great horned, whatever it is. That was very clearly. In fact, I think it's quite interesting that in the Bible, under this concept, when you see a very straightforward one that actually says what its purpose is,
Right.
it's ownership. And so, especially if you read this whole chapter of Ezekiel, it's God taking mercy on Israel as if it was a castaway infant that had been given no care and would have died if left there, and this great care for treating it like a newborn should, and then the growth, and then eventually, she grew up, and he's going to take her. That's the symbolism on as his wife, and so he provides her with these things that she needs. And so in this case, I think part of the purpose, I do think it's pretty fair to say part of the purpose of this is a sign of ownership.
Yes, I think ownership of coming under the authority and the roof and the household of one. Let's those kind of main points and let's bring all that in because I think it's important because it's very easy to look at these and go, hey, look, Genesis 24, Ezekiel 16. It mentions nose rings. That must be okay. I go ahead,
Well,
Mom and Dad. The Bible says I can have one, so
and
that's it.
But I've never seen a giant jeweled nose ring on somebody.
That's true. And also, I want some badger skin sandals. This and that. Well, one, we're often driven to find those verses because of something we see in the culture that's motivated us. But let's highlight again. What is our theme here? It's not just simply, it's okay. Look at these verses. Yep. It must be okay. We must try to understand God's mind. Mr. Robinson just brought out something fascinating you see in both Genesis 24 and Ezekiel 16 is you have actually a husband-wife dynamic. Even in Genesis, Abraham was there to find a wife. Mm-hmm. Those things would often, in that culture, and we'll get to culture in a minute, but in that culture, for a woman to have such things was a highlight that a man loved her, right? That maybe it's a father, but in these cases, it really is a husband. It's showing the affection of one and telling the world, this one is mine. Mm-hmm. Look at how I have adorned her. Look at how special she is to me. It's not a tool for, oh, well, I think I'm special, and I think this. It really is that kind of culture where you have someone who loves the one and has authority, really, because that's kind of a claim that Abraham's servant made, which was really the goal of bringing him into the family. So let's highlight that. In terms of what your parents think, what is God's mind? Well, I tell you what is on God's mind among a lot of things is if you're young, what do your parents think about this? Again, something can be okay and still be a sin if it is done in rebellion, whether it's the obvious rebellion or the kind of constant pushing that's born out of a spirit of rebellion. Yeah. And it's going to sound sexist today, but you know what? If you have a husband, why would you as a wife want to go out and just say, I'm just going to go ahead and do this and not actually say, well, I wonder what my husband thinks of that. I even, when it comes to facial hair, there's a lot of reasons I don't grow facial hair. One, I look like just a child trying to grow facial hair, but also because, the times that like COVID and stuff where I actually had kind of room to grow some, I don't like me kissing my wife goodbye as I go out the door, and she goes, "Ow!" She just she doesn't care about how much oil I put on that or whatever. It just she doesn't like it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that said, that's it. That's enough for me. She's the one I want to be happy with me. In these cases, you have a husband adorning his wife according to the customs of their cultures. As a wife, is that actually our question? I wonder if my husband would like this. Or if you're not yet married, what would my future husband think of something like that?
So see how you feel about this.
All right.
I think this is another great example of where God is probably very consciously aware that there's not as complete guidance maybe on this idea as we'd like. And it kind of falls in that category. We don't know what the ideal skirt length is, and things like that. You got to make a judgment call. And the way you make a judgment call is by understanding the mind of God.
Right. That's exactly right. In the cultures that we see in Genesis 24, Ezekiel 16, there's no doubt in the context of that in that culture, giving, say, your bride this golden, expensive, jewel, to wear in her nose, it told the rest of them, oh, he really loves her. Oh, she's, but you have to keep in mind that culture. And I know the first things we said, your parents, your future husband or your current husband, I know that if you're listening to this, you're living in a culture, most likely, at least in the West, that's trying to tell you don't care about other people, how you look, what you wear, things like that. Right. It's not about them. It's about you. Yep. That is a lie from the devil. Yeah. That's nowhere does God ever say, you know what, don't even worry about anybody else in your life. And so I would even say beyond parents, beyond future spouses or current spouses, I would honestly say, what is the impact on the rest of the people in your congregation? How is it? Is it going to encourage all of them? Is it going to actually make them, more excited, more closer to God, excited about the direction of the culture of the church, or is it going to cause concern?
Yeah,
I think that's a legitimate concern.
And I think because of how the conversation about the patriarchy has kind of died down a little bit, but I could see some out there kind of thinking maybe, oh, well, it's the patriarchy again. It's keeping the women under subjection. But to your point about kind of checking in, like they're just in theory, I'm the head of my household and I can do whatever I want, right, Mr. Smith? That's how it works, right?
Yeah.
There are just things, many of them, that I would never do something if I knew my wife didn't like it or had a good objection to it. So the husbands, the men, the ministers, I was just, it was a good opportunity to make this point again with my daughter, who it was not a controversy. This idea that only wives have to submit to their husbands, like nobody else has to submit to anyone. Like I submit to Mr. Smith as the leader of editorial. We both submit to Mr. Weston as the head of the church and Dr. Winnell as the head of the ministry. It's
in terms of physical working in charge of the church, right? Christ is the head of the church, Mr. Robinson. So you say the language. I just had to say it. I know what you mean. It's all good.
Really? There's a lot of. There's not. Well, yeah. Well, that's a good point. Even Mr. Weston
submits to Christ, right?
To Christ.
But from what you're saying, there's also a mutual submission because, man, there's times I know Mr. Weston is he's doing things just for us. He knows it's important to us. Yep. And for me, I try. I'm not going to say I do it well, but there's times I do try to go an extra mile or something because I know it's something for you. And that goes down to husbands as well.
I see you do it all the time.
Oh, well, thank you. Very kind. But husbands as leaders, well, they do submit to their wives' needs and concerns. And honestly, why? Because the greatest picture of a husband in the world is Jesus Christ, who literally submitted everything for the sake of his bride. So that authority is real, but it is kind of a mutual submission. It's not a one-way street in that way, even though the authority is very clear. This kind of brings up the invitation to consider the things we considered a while ago. Okay, that's fine. You see these things in the Bible, but let's consider those categories we discussed, like health reasons. When it comes to having, your nose pierced, I don't know if there's any health concerns out there. It's worth looking at if you don't consider it. I could see potential problems, but again, those could be imaginary. But what I do see an obvious connection is culture and tribe. Now, let me highlight this. We are listened to, believe it or not, Mr. Robinson, are listened to around the world. That's kind of crazy, Mr. Robinson. I don't know if, that's I don't know. There's people out there we don't know if we'll get to meet before Christ's return. We're very excited that you're listening in different places. And there are cultures out there where, kind of like in the ancient cultures we see in Ezekiel and Genesis, where nose rings are just kind of normal, right? If anything,
Right.
I'm going to exaggerate because I don't think this is the case, where instead of they exchange a ring for their finger, you give them a nose ring. Who knows? That's out there. And in cultures like that, that's very different. We're speaking of a Western culture, and in Western cultures, it's still not the norm. It's not a standard, right? It's not something that's seen as quote unquote normal. It is still seen as
Yes.
subculture.
Yeah. It's there's been more acceptance of it, but it
Yes.
is still not common.
There's definitely increased acceptance. And so again, we're not trying to make you feel bad if that's the case, but we're trying to speak to those who are kind of looking at making a decision.
Yeah.
Then keep in mind it is still a part of subculture, and we do have an obligation to think of, well, what subculture or what tribe am I coming across as identifying with in that case? What tribe of humanity? And we would encourage you to think of yourself as a part of God's tribe, the church tribe, the body of Christ. And in terms of the examples, it's worth asking again, well, why is it that I want this? Well, is it because, man, I love the way Mr. So-and-so's wife, my minister's wife, really rocks that nose ring. It looks really great. Or is it because we saw it someplace else? And as a result, we're kind of importing that, into the church culture. So yes, try to weigh God's mind in that regard. Mr. Robinson brought up ownership. In general, again, who is the owner of all of our bodies? Well, God is. And so we have to then think in how I do this. Well, how do I honor God? Well, am I honoring God with this choice? Am I honoring God in terms of how people will see me as one of His who bears His name? Now, I admit, on one hand, it could seem like that could be taken way too far. Like right now, I'm wearing a tie here in the office. It's like, oh, I got to make sure these colors, is this the right yellow that honors God? Well, you might think that sounds kind of ludicrous, but let me say, do I think, is this honoring of God every single time I pick a tie? No, I don't. But at the same time, yes, I want to honor God with dressing like I'm and so if I actually go outside of that and wear a tie that doesn't and failed to think about that, I'm grateful to be surrounded by a culture that says, hey, Smith, it's not, I'm not sure that's really the most effective tie for you to wear.
Yeah, well, exactly, because that's actually a trick question. There are no good yellow ties, and
I'm going to take it off right now.
sorry,
It's-
we have to have our own fun. Sometimes.
I want to say it's gold, maybe it's gold. I don't know what it is, but anyway, that said, thank you, Mr. Robinson. I now know I'll never wear one on at least not.
Honestly,
on,
with the blue shirt, it's
well, see, the blue shirt's what I was looking at my other ties the other, and I didn't. It's like I thought, I'll do a yellow tie today. So now I realize on podcast days, I just don't want Mr. Robinson there across the table, constantly staring at this yellow tie. And
see, today we're not honoring God.
However, that principle is, yes, we do need to actually keep people in mind. Like one of the things I want to bring up is what message are we communicating?
Yep.
Now, you might think I'm not trying to communicate a message. Doesn't make a difference. What we do wear does communicate something to people.
What is the old saying? I don't hear this so much anymore. It's like it's kind of like what you're projecting is shouting at me so loud that I can't
hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's
basically
right.
Your appearance and your demeanor is so shocking that I can't even.
Right. It used to be, especially way back, you go 60s, 70s, 80s, and people started to think, well, hey, man, I can dress however I want. And this guy should hire me just because I've got a punk style hairdo and I'm wearing all these spikes, on my jewelry, and I got the sleeves are cut off on my shirt. He should be able to look on the inside of me to see if he should hire me for this job. How I look is irrelevant to the job. Well, that's just the thing. The guy's got to make a decision. And you know what? You are showing him something. You're showing that you were willing to dress like a culture that overall is generally less trustworthy.
Yes.
And is going to be saying things to his customers. And he has the right to say, look, I'm sorry, I have to consider that in terms of hiring you for this job or not. Because we do end up saying something. And then finally, because we're hitting these things we've hit earlier, but in this context, and that is God's image. In what way do I believe I'm better reflecting God's image by that choice? Or have I not even considered the fact that, I have a duty to bear God's image with a certain respect for that image? Am I thinking of it as something that I can just use to reflect my own ideas, or am I actually trying to reflect him to the world?
Yes.
So that's that. Before we wrap up, because we're getting close to the time we'd normally want to spend, we will get to I don't think this will take very long. Other body piercings. And that's, oh boy, we're not even going to go through the list of all the things, but let's just say there's out there people piercing their tongues, their cheeks, their eyebrows. And honestly, I want to stop there, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah.
I really don't want to go,
You've kind of made your point.
Hey, thank you very much. All right. I will say first, there's nothing in the Bible that I could see that even comes close. After a while, you do start to wonder if you're getting close to just cuttings in the flesh, which are inappropriate. Yeah. But at the very same time, there's clearly things that speak against that. There's this whole kind of culture that seems to think, you know what? What are the weirdest places I can even do this? Right? The tongue, to pierce the tongue. You ever see people that just kind of talk sort of funny, and you finally realize, it's because they have a piece of metal shoved into their tongue. It's literally contrary to the function of that body part.
Plus, it's in your mouth, so you can't even see it. So what's the point? I guess every time you stick your tongue out, everyone's, look at that tongue ring.
Yeah, pretty much. The more you look into those things, you start to think, okay, now we are actively starting to depart from the image of God. It's kind of like, I'm not content with eyebrows. I got to shove a piece of metal in that.
Well, in a very extreme example, which is super, super rare, you've seen the people that have divided their tongue surgically, so it looks like a forked tongue.
Yes.
And did other elaborate things that literally change the way they look.
Yeah, I've seen some where they take a coral and have it supplanted into their forehead bone under their skin, so it looks like they have like horns on there. That kind of this whole, there is an entire subculture of body modification that really has rejected the image of God, has decided, no, I don't want it to look like that. I want to look like kind of freakish. I want to have fingernails I want to have skin that looks like a Komodo dragon, so let's tattoo some scales on me. I want to have contacts that make my eyes look like animal eyes. I want my fingernails pointy like a dragon or something. Now that is, if you don't see fundamentally something wrong with that, well then we're not going to be able to help you with a podcast. But you have cast aside the image of God in that regard. Well, there's a time when you start to get into body piercing where you're really on the fringe of that culture, where there's not even a question about it. You are disregarding the value of the body's integrity, and you've decided to cast it aside to just become something else. So yeah, I hope that's pretty plain.
Yeah, I mean, I know we probably sound old to younger listeners, and the older generations have always criticized the younger generations for things like this. But I hope you'll think about this a little bit and give this idea some thought. Like when we use the word meditate. To this day, I still think of meditating as just like this very conscious sitting still thinking, and it's not that at all. Like I think I've used my example before where I don't know why I don't still do this. It was so good. I would do my Bible study in the morning and then take a long walk afterward, and my brain would process what I thought about. But because this concept of being made in God's image, it's like we think that's such a high level thing, but we don't realize how far we have strayed from our Creator's intent in so many ways on this earth. And the more we start piling up piercings or tattoos or any kind of modification, is we just drift further. It's just an outward symbol of drifting further from our intent, our Creator's intent for us, and what our potential is. I think Mr. Armstrong really nailed it with the incredible human potential.
Yeah,
it is stunning when you start thinking about God reproducing Himself, and that you could be a God being. I mean, it's mind-boggling, and so I think God does care.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of obvious. Like I get that, but I guess we can roll into our conclusions. Did you see my?
I saw yours, Mr. Robinson. I had a place in our notes where I just said, "Hey, we can think about what comments we want to wrap things up." And Mr. Robinson, you going to read yours, or you want me to read it? I think it's hilarious.
I have to bring in Mirror Universe Evil John Robinson,
evil version of John Robinson.
Yeah,
so what would his conclusion be here?
His conclusion is that this whole podcast was a bunch of hot garbage, and don't let anybody tell you what to do. You need to express yourself.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's evil.
yeah, Mirror
John
Universe.
Robinson,
So,
Mirror Universe.
yeah.
That's a deep cut Star Trek reference that most people probably won't get.
They did it again in one of the not well received Star
Enterprise.
Trek.
They did
It
an
was-
Enterprise as well.
Did they? Well,
Yeah.
they did it in the one that's because their names start sounding so Discovery.
Oh, they did.
Mhm.
Oh, not
In
even.
fact, the
interested.
captain on the Enterprise was from the Mirror Universe.
Oh, really? Boy, not even interested. Haven't been interested in a long time. So that's not your actual conclusion, but that's you.
I
Should I just go
already
on?
concluded it. We're just saying, just think about it, and let's
Yeah.
be like our Creator and our potential.
You did that, and that actually I thought was a beautiful wrap up. I'll say for me, I would just say one: recognize your body bears God's image. It's utterly owned by Him, and it exists to serve His glory, not yours, not mine, but His. Please do not fall into the trap of looking to subcultures around us that are constantly shoved toward us by this lost and confused world that is around us. Look to the body of Christ. Look to those He's inspired to guide it and to live as examples inside of it. Admittedly, doing so imperfectly, but still those examples that we have. There is a cult out there of individual will in all things, and that is a devilish cult. Do not let that accidentally sway you because it is nonstop. Today's tattoo and piercing culture is a reflection of that cult. And I thought it'd be wise if we just left Paul, the Apostle Paul, to have the final word. And it repeats something he told us earlier in the podcast. For you were bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's.
Sit